Hi everyone. Wanted to talk about again Uranus and Gemini. I said I might do another video. I wasn't sure. So in the unpredictable spirit of Uranus, I've decided to do another one. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into what I talked about in the first video. If you've watched my June, July astrology, the first video on Uranus and Gemini, you know that Uranus arrived on July 7th. Is going to station retrograde and go back into Taurus on November 7th, wrap things up there, and then come back into Gemini for about 7 years in April of 2026. So we're getting a first idea of not only what this means to have Uranus in air sign Gemini, but to have all this new energy. So we've had a big shift, and again, I've said this many times before, from earth and water to fire and air. So it's going to be different for all of us. I don't mean different for all of us individually, but all the energy out there is going to be quite different. But let's stick with Uranus in Gemini. Third house, of course, this is all our communications, written and spoken. And I'll just give you all the details so you really know what it's about. We always say our communications, but it's more than that. It's also our way of thinking, our thought process, and our way of learning. Remember, the third house also relates to grade school, high school education. It is news and news reports. Keep that in mind. It is writing, letters, good old-fashioned letter writing. It is rumors and gossip as well, messages. It is our close kin. So we often say siblings. We also hear cousins. It's our neighborhood, our everyday local world and contact. So I always say our familiar faces and places. Short trips about town, commutes, even day trips or weekend getaways. Elementary education, high school education, I mentioned that. Technical training and studies. It's cars and roads, teachers and letter carriers, because the third house, Gemini, is ruled by Mercury. So if this sounds familiar of what I've said about Mercury, that is because Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini and associated with the third house. So Mercury, of course, the winged messenger to the gods in ancient mythology. So think it's regular communications that you produce or that come in, and also where we routinely go. So having said that, remember, Gemini is also represented by the twins. Gemini is a sign that, of course, is an air sign, very much about communication, thought process, a lot of comparing with Gemini, that aspect of two. So is it this or is it that? Fueled, of course, by Mercury, very curious, this, that, what's this like? What's that like? Gemini moves very quickly. They're on to the next idea by the time the rest of us catch up with the first idea. So that duality of Gemini, the twins, comes in with that idea of constantly exploring and comparing, right? How do these two things compare? So think of that duality. The last time I spoke about Uranus and Gemini, I mentioned a few things that came about the last time Uranus was in Gemini, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit more because I want to talk about how that's going to relate to what Uranus is going to bring us this time around. Do I know exactly what that's going to be? No, Uranus is so unpredictable and so far out there. This maybe isn't even something that is completely conceptualized yet or that we've seen yet. But looking back into the past, the last time Uranus was in Gemini was during the war years, the Second World War years, so from about 1941 to 1949. We saw a lot of things to do with communication, like ciphering and codes, for transmissions, like for military strategies. There were even movies made about that. We talk about the Enigma machine, decoding German cipher and all their communications. Also, the invention of, or the mass production of, a very cheap, accessible to everyone radio in Germany during the war years. Before that, we literally had the invention of printing. So the Guttenberg press back in the 1440s. Yes, you heard that right. We had the King James Bible that was finalized. That was published in 1611, another Uranus in Gemini cycle. Interestingly, before we had books and that idea of the printing press, everything was on tablets, was on scrolls, so very long sheets of paper or vellum at the time that you unrolled. But the first idea of a book was what the Romans called a codex, which were actually sheets of paper or sheets of animal skin held together at the spine like a book. And this was at about, doing my research, I discovered, interestingly, 100 CE or AD. This was also another Uranus and Gemini cycle. But what I really wanted to talk about was this communication that is going to come to us. Yes, communications are going to accelerate. Yes, even more information is going to be coming in. I keep saying discernment is going to be the key word. Your attention span is going to become a precious commodity. Everybody is vying for our attention. The longer you can keep us on a platform, the more followers someone can have, the more money they can make. So in the coming years, that vying competition, aggressively trying to get our attention, is going to become even more and more intense. And I think, again, with that duality of Gemini, some of us might completely sort of disappear into that world. We're always going to be on our phones. I was away on a day trip the other day, and I was at a museum, and among other things, and I was sort of walking around, but there are people who are literally glued to their phones all the time. It's like they're living within the bubble of that screen. Everybody is free to do what they want. This isn't criticism of any sort. But then there are people who are really, really cautious with how much time they spend online. I hear a lot of people say, I don't watch TV. I don't even own a TV anymore. I don't read the news. I don't like that aggressive, communication messages, visuals coming in all the time. So that is definitely going to increase. All of these placements of the outer planets, the heavy hitters, is just going to increase all of that. Remember, they're sitting trine to one another and sextile, so the two most flowing aspects in astrology. So all this is working together, but Uranus in Gemini is going to bring us something even more revolutionary, and is just going to rev up everything to do with communications. So in that idea, what I did want to talk about and dive a little bit deeper in the things I mentioned in the last video is, yes, great communication inventions, wonderful, giving us, that window on the world. But at the same time, what are we being told? And again, that need for discrimination. So I was talking about those mass-made German radios during the Second World War, and I jokingly said, what was it for? So they could all listen to music? No, of course not. It was for them to give people or communicate to people German propaganda. And this little radio that it's about the size of half a loaf of bread standing on its end. It's a small little box, mass-produced at the request of Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, which was Goebbels. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Or who cares, actually, if I'm pronouncing his name right or wrong. And accessible, so every German could have one in their home. Of course, we're in the era before TV, right? So the only way to get news would be talking to your neighbor, going to the local store. Sometimes people would go over to someone's house who did have a radio, or wind up in a public meeting place, where there was radio accessible. Now almost everyone could have one in their home. So great, right? You think, oh, here's my window on the world. This communication, I'm going to get information. It's going to be so wonderful. But what communication? What information are you getting? This radio was designed to be very, very weak at picking up signals. Sometimes at night you can get radio stations that are far away, maybe just because there's less traffic on the airwaves. This could not. No, that wasn't the idea. It was just that you could pick up German government radio, which was going to spew propaganda. There were no numbers really on the dial. Don't want you to go elsewhere. We just want you to listen to our propaganda again. So I find there's a lot of parallels between that and between what we're being shown today. We're in one place thinking we're getting information, but it's being curated and streamlined in order to fit an agenda of some sort. Hope I'm being clear on that. So while this looks great, I'm going to get all this information, you're getting very particular information. You're getting a lot of information, but within a very particular framework. So there's a subtle coercing that was going on. Basically, if this is your only form of communication with the outside world, you could be told anything. You could be told, yeah, Germany's winning the war. We're doing great. It's going super good. All the powers are crumbling before us. That wasn't true at the end of the war. We're taking over Russia. The Russians are being defeated by us. That was not the case. Actually, when the Germans moved into Russia, the Russians practiced scorched earth, literally took their animals and fled towards the east, burned everything behind them. The Germans had nowhere to go. There was no shelter. There was no more food. They had burned their crops. They had burned their houses. Russians, man, they're extreme people. Don't mess with them. And it was one of the coldest winters in history. So they were stuck there in Russia with nothing to eat and no shelter. You could say, we're bombing the Allies and we're bombing the English and, we're winning the war. Yeah, the people in Germany or in Berlin were thinking, hey, we're being bombed too, right? So there's that idea of, yes, we're giving you a means of communication, but we're really curating the communication you're being given. And if we look back even before that at the invention of the printing press with Guttenberg, what was mass printed? Well, it was church indulgences. So the church sort of had the monopoly of the communications that were going out. Church indulgences, by the way, were things you could do to make up for sin you had done. It was sort of like a guide to what penance you should do. The reformists didn't like church indulgences, but that was it's about at the same time, a little bit later, that we got into the Reformation. Won't go into that. But, the same idea. What information are you being given? Maybe there's a little bit of seditious political information. The king is a fink. I was writing this, and I wrote that down in my notes. If you're about my age, if you're somewhere in your 50s, there is a comic strip where one of the characters would say the king is a fink, and I cannot remember what it is for the life of me. I keep thinking Hagar the Horrible, but I really don't think that's it. Anyway, if you know, let me know. I'm racking I should Google it. I could probably find it on Google. But that kind of idea, but very, again, limited information. How many people had a printing press? How many people could afford to have something printed? What were you allowed to print even? So, again, a form of communication, but very curated. One large organization behind that, the church, that was getting their church indulgences printed. Also a Bible. There was the Gutenberg Bible, a certain version of the Bible. Again, a particular version, right, of the Bible. But then it gets interesting, and another example, of course, as I said, was the King James Bible, published in 1611 on another Uranus and Gemini cycle that ran from 1606 to 1614. This is also interesting. Now we're mass printing Bibles, mass printing as you could for the time. But this was the King James version. And who was King James? James VI of Scotland and I of England? Well, he was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was cousin to Elizabeth I, that died in the early 1600s, 01, 03, I think. And that's when James, of course, became King of England. James was always very interested in demonology and witchcraft. He wrote a book on demonology, which is another word for witchcraft. He actually became interested in this when he traveled to Denmark to meet his bride-to-be, Anne of Denmark, and was introduced to the idea of witches. There was just the beginnings of the witch hunt. I won't make this long, but follow me on this. When they came back, they encountered severe storms. And by the way, there are many videos on YouTube about King James. They encountered severe storms, and James got it into his head that somehow witches had cursed him, and that's why they almost perished at sea on their way back. Started his own witch hunt when he came back to England. They did find this poor woman. I can't remember how they came across her, tortured her. She finally confessed, was burned at the stake, and then, with his support, backing, pushing interest, the witch hunts began. So he also had a Bible published that he had revised or that oversaw the writing of. For example, there were certain words that he didn't like used and had them changed for another word. Oh, so here's my point again. Oh, here's the Bible now printed, King James Bible, accessible to everyone. printed in English, which wasn't something that was done before the push of the Reformation. James was a Protestant. He was Church of England. And one of their things was wanting to make the Bible accessible to everyone, able that everyone could read it. Don't know how many people could read at that time. But anyway, here I'm giving you all this information. Here's the Bible in a language you can read. Great. But what type of version do we have by a man who is obsessed by, first of all, believes witches exist, witches in the sense of women who are making pacts with the devil or who are possessed by the devil and doing the devil's work, who can do all these crazy magical things like, making your livestock drop dead and controlling the weather and turning the cow's milk so it's undrinkable and all these things, and they could change into animals or had a special relationship with their cats. That's where we get the cat and the broom. They were somehow flying around and doing these crazy things. And of course, behind that was, and again, not going to go into that too much, but, the taking away of women's power, right? No more wise women, no more healer women. This was just all the prerogative of the church. No more of these spiritual practices, Wiccan practices. It was just the Catholic Church or the Church of England that wanted to have monopoly. So anyway, that was my spiel. But so what type of version of a Bible do we have by a man who is fascinated, maybe obsessed with that, and believes all these things that we no longer believe today, hunting down women, torturing them into confession and burning them at the stake. And there were men also that the same thing happened to, many more women than men, but men also as well who were accused of witchcraft. So just, that pattern, and this is, I'm sure, what we're going to see with this cycle of Uranus and Gemini, something wonderful that is going to come in, that is going to be window on the world, just speeding up all our communications, giving us such a wider view of things, but again, within what framework? It's within these parameters. So you're not actually getting everything. You're getting a lot of things that are being curated and are being chosen and shown to you. And this is already the case, right? Like whatever corner of YouTube or the internet you're in, you're getting more and more of whatever you're looking at. But there's a lot of other stuff going on out there that we're not seeing just because there's so much to sift through. Again, I think there are people that are going to be completely absorbed in this. Those who are sort of going to drop out. Would that be the duality of Gemini? Perhaps we're going to be in two camps. So people who are going to embrace all this and be completely, always online and everything is going to be done online in that world. And those who are going to more drop out, take a step back, take a step away. Those who still see online as being something else, and those who integrate it just completely seamlessly as part of their everyday world. So is that going to be that idea of communications and duality in Gemini? Gemini being of the mind, we're going to have that duality of being in one place physically, but our mind is going to be completely elsewhere as we're being absorbed into all of this. And again, I can't tell you what it is. That's the beauty of Uranus. We don't know what it's going to show up as. But there's always that idea of we're giving you more ideas, more communication, more information. But again, also that it's being curated and it's not maybe all the information or all the communication. And I'm always optimistic. I'm hopeful that Uranus will invent something that I keep calling, pardon me, but the bullshit meter or the filter that will help us know quicker, what is or what isn't, or what is filtered and what is AI. There's so much stuff out there. And maybe it's a generational thing because people much younger than me instantly look at things and go, that's AI. That's been filtered. Oh, she's using a filter on those photos. And I'm still in the era of, wow, her skin is really nice. Her makeup looks really good. And they're like, shut up, man. It's a filter. Can't you tell? And I'm like, no, actually, I can't. I'm still falling for it. But I am hopeful that, it'll give us something to discern as much at the same time that we're getting all that information coming in. So that's just another aspect. I thought it was really an interesting pattern how Uranus in Gemini has, through the ages, going back hundreds and hundreds of years, has always brought in some new communication of some sort. We saw printing a lot, printing large scale of certain books, namely the Bible and that King James version, but it is one version. So you're getting, a lot of one particular thing. You could have printed more Gutenberg Bibles, which was another version. You could have printed other books, but no, that wasn't, the choice. And of course, James being the king dominated over all this. Gutenberg did, as I said, print a Bible as well as church indulgences. Also, the Roman codexes, I assume it was government things, but I am guessing. Again, World War II brought the radio, the Germans with their mass-produced radio, but again, limiting the people to one source of information, which was government radio and propaganda. And propaganda is, interestingly, a ninth house element or a ninth house topic across. So a lot of that, this is what filters in more on our individual level. But, you're receiving all that propaganda, right? We're getting, oh, cool, we're getting all that information. But what information is it? It's Nazi propaganda. So just keep that in mind. Of course, it's not going to play out exactly again, but that pattern is going to repeat. And that's the thing about astrology. It shows us where the energy is. We look back in the past and we see those energetic patterns repeating. I do want to do another video because this has already been long enough, but talking about this has a lot of people worried because the last time Uranus was in Gemini, we were talking the atom bomb, Nagasaki and Hiroshima, interestingly, 2 bombs, and we're talking about Uranus in Gemini. And of course, we have Neptune in Aries. I looked back on that a little bit as well, but I'll talk about that in another video and where I saw the placements. Neptune wasn't necessarily in Aries during these other wars. That's why I've been hearing a lot of, the Revolutionary War, War of Independence, the Second World War, all Uranus in Gemini placements. But Neptune was in another place during that time, and I don't want to talk about it right now, but there's also interesting patterns in relation to that, but I will keep them for another video. I'm going with small messages, small communications, things that are digestible. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you're interested in hearing about this next video. Let me know how Uranus, remember Uranus arrived July 7th, how that went for you. It started for me at midnight on July 7th with a power outage that lasted 7 hours. Uranus is related to lightning, to electricity, and this was caused loss of electricity by lightning that struck a barn. Luckily, I was really worried it was a barn with animals, but it was an abandoned building on a part of abandoned road, but close enough that it put the power out in the neighborhood for about 7 hours, something that's never happened since I've lived here. So I thought, wow, we're off to a really bold start. Guys, thanks for listening. Always glad to have you here. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.